back to another episode, Complex Like Wine, the podcast. We talk about complicated things, improve over time, just like wine does. If you're watching on Spotify and YouTube, you'll see we have kind of holiday Christmas lights, obviously, because this week, or the coming week, is going to be Christmas. And I have a special guest with us this week. We have Sandy, and she has a lot of wisdom to share with us, and she has an inspiring story and just really amazing insight. And around the holidays, I know it can be really difficult for some people, so I hope this episode brings some comfort or some guidance to whoever needs it. But hi, Sandy. Thank you for being on the podcast.
It's so good to be with you. Thank you.
Of course. No, I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, and then we'll have dinner after the podcast as your treat.
Good. I'm working for my dinner.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well, so we're touching on grief today, and you have gone through a lot, but just the way you carry yourself already, just communicate on the phone, and today you're just very bright, and I really appreciate and just love that. So first, I guess, you can introduce yourself, your background, and then your story, and I guess we'll take it from there because we both have our notes. There's a lot of good stuff that we both didn't want to miss on touching, so I'll just let you take it away.
Thanks so much. Well, let's see. My name is Sandy Wyman. Currently, I work at Inland Empire Health Plan as the Vice President for Mission. So that's interesting because IEHP is a public entity, not a faith-based organization. So for us, the mission is how we live our values every day. Our mission statement says we heal and inspire the human spirit. And so what are all the ways we sort of breathe life into our work and stay resilient for the work? Maybe consider our work as more than just a job, a calling, and kind of serving others from our heart. So that's what it's about for us there. My background, and you can see my hair is this color, so I've been around a while. I graduated from nursing in 1975 and did critical care nursing for many years, ICU, emergency room. Went on to do some other things as I had kids and didn't want to work weekends, and nursing is lovely that way. You can move in and out of a lot of different spaces, but I'm also a trained chaplain and did that for a number of years. And probably my first clinical love is palliative and hospice care, end-of-life care. And then the last many years, decade and a half or more, have been in leadership roles for integrating mission in an organization, organizational culture, leadership development, and again, kind of the serving from the heart and care for the caregiver. This idea of how do we, as clinicians and others in healthcare, especially today, these days, stay alive for this work and thrive in it. And so all along the way, in the work, I've been drawn to and had opportunities to kind of cultivate my training. I'm a credentialed coach in the area of grief and loss and life transition. and it gives me a lot of sense of purpose to do that because I've been through a fair number of losses myself. And as for many people, what makes the most sense and is most gratifying is to give back from where you've come from.
Yeah, from my experience, I haven't dealt with a whole lot of loss in the sense that you're about to share with us. And so I'm really looking forward to just hearing from you, especially some of the points we want to touch on of how to get through seasons like this. Yes. And then if you know somebody that's going through something, how to be there for them. So I'm just really eager and excited to hear everything that you have to share with us.
Oh, bless you. Well, so the holidays can be a challenge for many of us as we come around to the time of year where we've created a lot of nostalgia through the years. And as kids, we've opened presents and we've sat around the Thanksgiving table. And mind you, for some people, there are a lot of memories there that are painful because of the home they lived in or because of their family of origin or what have you. For me, I had very, very positive memories. I had my mom's dad, who was this great big man who was our Santa, every Christmas. And so along about 30 years ago, my middle child, Trevor, who had just turned 7, began having, in context, I had a son then who was 10, and then Trevor was 7, and then my daughter Taryn was 2. And Trevor, who'd never been sick, began having some double vision and some dizziness that we thought was related to his first ear infection that he had over a Christmas in 1993. Mm-hmm. And he was getting a little carsick on the school bus, and so we had to actually take him out of school a month or so later because the dizziness was such that he just couldn't remain in the classroom. He wanted to lay down all the time or else he had all this dizziness. So we began our rounds of seeing specialists. And where we were living at the time, there was no pediatric neurologist. This was Santa Maria, California. And so we eventually, over a month or so, ended up with a pediatric neurologist in Santa Barbara. And all along the way, we were having MRI scans, and all the physicians would say it was normal, and we'd rejoice. And but it was like watching Trevor have a kind of a slowly evolving stroke. So his mind was always sharp, but he would say, like one morning, "Mom, I just feel like I'm swallowing bubbles. It just feels funny." And when we were driving, he said, "Mommy, I see 2 of you, and I see 2 cars where there was just one." And that began to become permanent. And so when he began having these symptoms in January of 1993, it was by March we pulled him out of school. And he was pretty much laying down a lot at home, and we were getting to different physicians and specialists. And finally, along about the end of April, I think we took him in for the 6th MRI scan. And I remember as we walked, actually pushed him on his gurney back to his room on the pediatric floor of Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. There were 3 radiologists that were looking at his x-ray films and pointing and shaking their head. And it was the first time that I'd kind of allowed myself to think that we might be dealing with something else. So skipping some of it just to kind of shorten it for y'all over a 6-month period. We waited in the waiting room, and I understand why they call them waiting rooms. Now we need to call them something else, but it feels like an eternity. And we waited for this young pediatric neurologist that we had, who had 4 little kids and a little boy Trevor's age. And he came in to tell us the news of this 6th MRI scan, and he had tears already coming down his face. And he said, "I wish I didn't have to tell you what I have to tell you, but it appears that Trevor has a pontine glioblastoma. It's the fastest growing tumor, cancerous, in the brainstem. And there are no treatments. That is, we can start radiation and hope to relieve some of his symptoms, but he probably has a few weeks to live." So, as some others listening may know and have experienced what it's like to get the kind of news where you feel like all the air is sucked out of the room and you don't know when you're going to be able to take another breath. And I remember going in and telling Trevor because he wanted to know everything. And so I went in and explained that he had this little tiny thing that not even the size of a pea that was in this part of his brain that keeps everything going. And that in our faith tradition, as we believed, if God, as we said it, didn't choose to do a physical miracle, and that wasn't going to happen, that children who have this kind of tumor don't live very long. And I remember Trevor searching my face and looking at me, and I started to cry a little bit, and he started to cry. And I can still feel him patting me on my back and saying, "Well, Mommy," he said, "at least I had 7 years. Some people don't even have that." And that's kind of how he was. He was a redhead, freckled, green eyes. Every picture I have of him is smiling. His glass was always half full. Life was just doable. And he was always thinking of other people. And so we had some tears together, and that began what was only going to be, we didn't know, just 2 weeks together before he passed. So we sang lots of songs, and we drew lots of pictures, and he had lots of people come down and visit, and he had all these Tootsie Roll Pops in his room, and he'd give out candy to everybody who came and see him. Their cards were just wall to wall, and his little first grade class came down, as many as could, to see him. And I've always said it was the most bitter but also the sweetest time, I guess, for our family. It was nightmare, because you're on a train that you can't make stop. And at the same time, the way that people showed up and gathered around us and loved on us and were there, and some of them stood beside us, and we knew that they knew because of things they'd experienced. It was a very special time. And when it became quite clear that he was not going, we started radiation. We sent his scans to specialists known all over the world, like Dr. Fred Epstein back at New York, and Ben Carson, who's also a pediatric neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins, and to Loma Linda Medical Center in Stanford. And within 24 hours, I talked with all those physicians, and they concurred what kind of tumor this was. Now, this was 30 years ago. It's still a highly fatal tumor. It only occurs in kids about 6 to 10 years of age, and only about 100 kids in the country a year. Not a lot of research there because of the volume. And so I think these days kids live longer because of some of the things that they do. Now, you can have a glioma. We hear of those kind of tumors somewhere else in your brain and have that removed and do quite well depending on what other kind of brain. But in the brain stem, where all the relay is for breathing and everything else, it's like adding a glioma is like adding coffee mate to coffee. You just can't remove any part of the healthy tissue because it's just become a part of it. So in those 2 weeks, we just loved on him. And I remember he developed a kidney stone, which is very rare for kids. But because he'd been in bed for 3 months with all the dizziness, we haven't been able to hydrate him really well. And he had to lay on his right side to eat all the time and push his food down the side of his mouth so he wouldn't choke. He was very careful and did really well. We had speech therapy and occupational therapy and all of that for one of the 2-week stints he was in the hospital. Then he came home for 3 weeks and then told me one day, "Mom, I can't swallow my pills." And back in the hospital we went, and that became our final 2 weeks. So one of the things that was really beautiful is that his birthday had been May 14. And this was in between hospitalizations, and he had ordered these little larvae that come and that become butterflies. I don't know if you've ever done that, but
I have not
like
personally,
a cool thing to do. And you might want to try it one time. I thought this can't possibly work, And you send away from this catalog, and you end up getting these 5 little skinny little larvae, and they're in this glass jar with a filter paper on the top. And they're supposed to eat this brown gooey stuff that they're sitting on, and then they get fat, and then they go up and and they spin their cocoons and hang from the filter paper. And then you take the filter paper out, put it in a plastic viewing box, cardboard that they send you, and then give them little drips of sugar water for 2 or 3 days, then you let them go. And I thought, right, this is going to work. But Trevor he loved all creatures, great and small, and he'd been looking at that in a catalog, and, he was one of the ones in our family who planned for things. And so by the time we went back into the hospital, that last and final time that we didn't really know was the final time, he was concerned he wasn't going to be able to see the butterflies come out. And we lived about an hour and a half away from the hospital. So I went home one day and peeled we were all hanging there. They'd spun their cocoons. It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I peeled the filter paper off and stuck it on the plastic viewing box, and then drove our van with these things flapping, in the box all the way down, and just saying, "Oh, please let them survive." And this message went out all over the hospital that there was a little boy on pediatrics who was growing butterflies, and everybody would come in every day or so. "Are they out yet? Are they out yet?" And so one day they all came out, one at a time, 5 of them. They were little painted lady butterflies. So they're kind of orange and yellow and black, and they're so pretty. And we fed them some sugar water for a couple days. And on a Friday, we went up to the roof of Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital and let them go. We opened the box, and one at a time they flew away. And Trevor, in his faith perspective, he said, Mommy, he said, the caterpillars are like our life on earth, and the cocoons are like when we die, and the butterflies are like when we go to heaven. And he was just an old soul. He would come out with things like that quite a bit, and he became kind of a little teacher for all of us. His courage was tremendous. We all spent time in tears together, but I spent a lot of time laying on the bed with him. When it came finally, when this kidney stone developed and he was having so much pain, finally having pain for the first time, an abdominal pain, and the doctors set us down and they said, you have an opportunity here that some families don't have with this kind of tumor because of the kidney stone. The only thing to do is go do surgery to try and remove it, and then he'll be on a ventilator, a breathing machine, and that's probably where he'll remain until he dies. Well, no one wanted to do that. I didn't want to put Trevor through that. So the only other choice was to begin to medicate him with pain medication. And so we did that to the legal limit of his weight, because that's what it took to relieve the pain. And the doctor sat and told us, listen, just understand, and I knew this as a critical care nurse, but when you're in it and it's your turn, you need others to tell you. And they just said, when we begin giving this medication, he will appear unconscious and kind of go to sleep, and probably will not wake up again. We don't know how long that'll be. We're not trying to hasten the end of his life. That's not what good pain management ever does. But it sometimes allows the body to do what it's going to do. And of course brings him comfort and peace. It was a lot of pain he was in. So I remember going into a room, an empty room in pediatrics, and I took everything off that was decent to take off in case someone came in, and I laid down on the floor, and I just unloaded and cried and prayed and whatever for a couple of hours. And I just couldn't believe how a greater good could be served by laying this little precious, kind, loving, thoughtful, amazing child to rest, as every parent's heart has yelled out for that when they've gone through this too. But I began to have some peace towards the end of that. I can't explain it, but I just knew that we were being walked with and watched over and loved on, and that somehow we were going to get through. And so I went in and told Trevor that this pain he'd been having, that the doctors I described to him where that was coming from, and the doctors have said they have some medicine that they could give you that would just allow you to be comfortable and go to sleep. And when I said the word sleep, his eyes got real big, and he looked at me. He knew. And again, we had some tears, and I said, so is that what you would like? I said, please know that, we're going to be with you, all the time, and couldn't love you more, and Mama's right here, and whatever. And he gave me a thumbs up sign, and he asked to see the family portrait that was in the room, this 8x10, and we brought it over. And he started by touching his big brother's face, and then touched all our faces. And I said, this was a Saturday. I said, would you like to start seeing more of the family? Have them come. I said, tomorrow, the next day was Father's Day. So he nodded. And so we began making phone calls. And before we started this medication for him, he had a couple hours with family that were all around his bed and, laughing, crying, and loving on him and stuff. And then we started that, and I always tell people that was the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life, was the silence of him just going to sleep and being quiet, but relaxing his muscles and being at peace and not suffering. And it took a couple days, and we just, again, loved on him and loved on each other as a family. So, in my life since, I've been through a couple of divorces. Unfortunately, about a year later, my kid's dad and we are good friends to this day, and he's long remarried, but he was really struggling. He would tell you that if he were here. And we just kind of, 8 out of 10 marriages dissolve out of the death of a child. And that's what we experienced. And so, so that was an added sort of grief. My daughter, 2 years later, was born. I had her at 6 months, which was odd. And I just had a condition, and she came all that early, weighed 1 pound, 11 ounces, and just did really, really well. But she came 2 years before Trevor. So you feel like, ooh, Taryn was a miracle, you know? And then 2 years later, oh, Trevor died, and we prayed our hearts out. And then, then you kind of go. So there was 5 years in there that were just really kind of Mr. Toad's wild ride.
Right.
But I've never had also as rich of a season of, now I've seen plenty of people, because we make choices how we move through these times. And admittedly, I admit that I have great family support and a solid upbringing and a faith community. But sometimes in a faith community, you can struggle as much or sometimes more with grief and loss because you feel like you get confused. People get confused. Or like, wait a minute, I've been good all my life and I've done all this stuff and I have all this pain anyway. And of course, life doesn't work like that it measures out to us according to, how good we've been or not good we've been. The rain falls on everybody. So there's a lot of learning that went on for me that I am to this day grateful for, really grateful for, even though, and it's opened doors for me to be able to come alongside and walk with people who are going through their dark nights of the soul, and also learn from them and be strengthened by them. We're not alone. And the only thing that makes real sense is that we hopefully can come through it. There's no getting over it. There's no standard time for getting over grieving at all.
Right.
We're not meant to get over it. We're really meant to work it into the soil of our life over time. So out of that grows strength and beauty for ourselves, and that others can borrow from us, when they need it. So yeah, I look forward to just share a few pointers about, or lessons I've learned anyway along the way. And in my study, I'm a grief educator and so forth that might be helpful for someone else. Yeah.
No, well, first, thank you for sharing that with me and everyone listening. Especially, again, like the holidays can be very difficult,
Yes.
and whether if somebody has experienced loss directly or knows somebody's loss, just to be able to hear someone's perspective. I personally haven't dealt with a close death yet.
Yes. I hadn't either at your age.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's the thing, like the older you get, it's coming.
It's universal.
Right. Like at some point it's coming. And so I know, at least me listening to you and just the way you talk about your son and then just everything you've learned, I know I'm going to be able to take away points from it after this conversation.
Oh, bless you. Well, I'm constantly learning. I think that, we hurt much because we love much. And I think to live any other way, we'd have to be rocks and stones. So pain is and pain is not made greater, especially emotional pain is not made greater by feeling it. It actually softens over time as we share it, as we talk it through, understanding that no one goes through this in exactly the same way or in the same pace. Men and women in general tend to grieve differently. Guys will go out and play a round of golf, never say a word, and it's therapeutic, right? Or take the car apart and put it back together again. They tend to work through their stuff more in silence and internally. And women, again, this is very general, but women in general tend to work it out through talking it and through the relationships in their life, right? So one is not better than the other. They're just different, but we need to give each other a lot of grace because we do go through it differently.
Do you think that has a big correlation with why a lot of marriages, let's say,
I think so.
End up, yeah.
I think so. It's very hard. Like one of the therapists that we saw just said, hey, if you pass each other in the hallway and your fingers touch, just rejoice. But if you can just stay friends through this time and give each other a lot of grace, and keep coming back to what brought you together in the first place, and so forth. You usually can make it through. But, everyone has to go through it in their own way. And so, grief is interesting. We're talking about right now the loss through death, but there's lots of different kinds of grief, right? So grief is kind of living in the disparity of how it is and how we'd like it to be. Not that we'd like the next new car and the bigger house, not that kind of disparity, but really we think of it a lot through the loss through death. But there's loss of relationships, there's loss of health, there's loss of financial stability, just hopes and dreams, the loss of a pet. There's grief that's called disenfranchised, which is grief that's really not socially honored or acceptable. So way back when, a few decades ago, it was the AIDS epidemic. And so that was a disenfranchised kind of grief. And that almost layers a whole nother kind of grief on top of that, right? If it can't be openly acknowledged or honored or shared by a family or by friends, like something has to stay a secret or something that is a double grief. And grief is not an illness to get over. It's not a problem to solve. It is natural and it's necessary. And some may have heard this, the thing that says, to heal, you must feel, in whatever way we feel, and hopefully take care of ourselves in a healthy way, kind of as we go through that. But no one can ever know what someone else is feeling or experiencing. I could meet a mother who lost her son from the same diagnosis, who was the same age and died on the same day of the same month of the same year, and I don't have a clue how she feels. I know what the experience was for me, and that's why when we come alongside each other during these times, rather than trying to fix it or judge it or trying to tell someone what we think they ought to do, maybe based on what we've experienced, to just simply say, I can't imagine what this has been like for you. I know what was helpful for me. I don't know if it'll be helpful for you. May I share that with you, right? Because no one can ever understand. Sometimes we say that, I understand how you feel, or what have you, and we're meaning well, but no one really can ever understand. And we're all going to seek different levels of support and so forth. So whether grief gets integrated eventually as a strength in us or as a bitterness over time has a lot to do with the story we tell ourselves about it, the meaning that we give to it, ascribe to it, and the support that we seek and accept. So important not to be in isolation, and to, other people need the blessing of loving on us when we're going through hard times. Sometimes, especially as women, we're kind of there for other people, right? Yeah. And you're probably someone I can tell already whose friends would want to kind of lean on you or seek you out. You would be there for them, right? Yeah. So, wisdom I would pass along is it's a more challenging lesson to learn to receive. Giving is much easier than receiving. Yeah.
I'm kind of getting chills right now because this is actually something I've been struggling with for the past 2 weeks. So that's what I really needed to hear. So thank you.
Yeah, and over time, if we don't allow other people to give to us and be there for us, it's kind of arrogant. I had a friend many years ago, and I was a little older than you, and she came to see me in my office. I was a chaplain in a hospital. And she had some things she wanted to share with me, and of course I was there for her and whatever. And then she stopped and she said, Sandy, who's there for you? And I have lots of friends I could have named to her, and they're on my hand. I knew I could call them at 3 a.m., but her point was, do you reach out to them? Do you allow them to be there for you? And I journaled on that and stopped and thought about that for many days after. And I realized there were times and opportunities where instead of maybe coming across as, I got that, I got it.
Yeah.
To just simply, vulnerability is really our strength. I mean, if you've listened to Brene Brown lately,
Yes.
right? So vulnerability is really our strength, that ability to be humble and open and say, I got a lot of stuff yet to learn that I can learn from others. And my voice in the world is important, but I'm not all that. And a bag of nuts, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it's this balance of finding your voice and also at the same time being humble and saying, I have a lot I can learn, from other people. And that kind of vulnerability will always serve you well, to move through the world that way, because you invite other people to do the same. And my goodness, the world could be at much more peace than it is now, right? Instead of trying to push its intolerance, onto each other. I was driving here today. I know you're going to play this toward Christmas, but this is the day, and yesterday and the day before, when all the terrorist things are happening by Hamas to Israel. And of course, nothing is new under the sun. We see this in every generation and over and over and over again. People's inhumanity and, abuse and trauma and hatred towards other people. And I was listening to some of it on the way over here. And I just thought how many people, as we're speaking right now, across the globe are in unspeakable grief. And some of them only know that kind of life too. It's just been, but hundreds of people have lost their families today. And yet watch over the next few weeks as well, because we send our hearts to them, and watch the strength that comes in communities who rise up, right, and pull together and extend compassion and heal and restore. And so there's something in us as well that we can choose, right, to heal and restore and to show up well for other people. And it's just important we let people do that for us too.
I definitely needed that reminder, and I know there's a lot of people listening too that probably needed to hear that, because like you said, it's a lot easier to give, but then to be on the receiving end, takes another level of vulnerability to be willing to accept that.
And think, it helped me to think and ask myself, who needs I would start my day sometimes with, where can I serve, and open my eyes so that I can see the needs around me and so forth. But then I started adding, who needs the blessing of being there for me today?
I really love the way you framed that. For me personally, I've always struggled with asking for help because I don't want to put myself on their plate.
Sure.
So I may give them I don't want to say excuses, but, I excuse myself for them. Like, well, they have a lot of things going on. Or, in my situation, I'll tell myself, whatever I'm going through is not that big of a deal, or I need to put on someone else. So I really love that you said it that way.
It's an interesting learning in life, because if you're a person that has a heart for service and serving others, that's a beautiful thing. You don't ever want to dampen any of that. At the same time, someone else needs to serve, and why wouldn't it be for me? Right? Why wouldn't I allow that to be for me when I need it? Or to your point, ask for it, actually.
Yeah.
And say, I call you up at midnight and say, something's just hitting me right now. Can I just talk it through with you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be there for someone else, right? Well.
Yeah. Like you said, a lot of my friends, I'm the one that they go to for phone calls or to reach out. And I love doing that. But then I wonder, but like you said, who's there for me? I know they would be, but it's actually putting that into action.
It's a shift in your mind, though.
Yes, yeah. Huge shift.
A big shift. But I think if you can get it when you're young, I don't know, the dance all through your life with people is just really beautiful. This give and take. That's kind of what a dance is anyway, right? You don't want to be leading all the time.
No, it gets exhausting sometimes.
It's exhausting. And again, some people will walk away from it, because those of us who may naturally lead and naturally have a heart to serve, we're not making the space for others to be able to step up and do that. And that's important. So there's just a couple other myths I thought I'd share about grief. Do we have time?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yay.
Yes.
So one of the myths is that I've alluded to already, is that people need to get over their grief. So there is, again, no standard time for getting over it, and people have the right to be sad for as long as they're sad. Now, if weeks and months into a loss, someone is not getting out of bed or getting out of their robe and is not eating and is isolating, that's different. Because prolonged grief can become depression over time. And so we do want to keep our mind's eye on those that we know are grieving and are sad. Some people go, for example, in the case of losing the death of my son, some people would go home right away and just, take everything out of the room and take pictures off the wall. And whatever. Other people will leave it there for a couple of years. There's no right or wrong about that. If someone, however, has made a shrine to the person and they're talking with them and have not 2 years later accepted the loss and are just sort of really struggling with it mentally and emotionally, then that's different. They probably could use some professional help just to work through that. Right. They're probably struggling with sleeping and so forth. One of the other ones is that tears is a sign of weakness. So tears are part of our strength. They actually carry out toxins with them. They have a purpose. And they're actually, for me, I found they're just really a sign of feelings I can't find words for. And so we express it that way as our emotion and as our tears. So any guys that are listening, it is actually kind of cool to cry. It's okay. But we've socialized men, particularly in this country, that it's kind of a sign of weakness. Little boys stop crying and so forth. We're feeling people. So it's just part of the wholeness of who we are. One of the misunderstandings is that someone who's grieving is going to have more sadness if we talk about it. And so you'll find people around, like at work or wherever, avoiding it.
Like tiptoeing
around it. And actually, most grieving people love to hear the name of the person who passed. And the truth is, they're thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, for someone to come and care, or to maybe ask them what's most helpful when they come back to work or what have you. Is it comfortable for you if I ask any questions, or if we talk about it, or if we, because I just want to be helpful. So asking people, what is good for them, because everyone experiences it in their own way. And so the best thing isn't always to leave people alone. Some of them are feeling rather isolated anyway. Some people may naturally withdraw for a while because they just need to do that in order to kind of be with their sadness and process that, and maybe they're a little more private with that. So we don't just want to bombard people if our personality is different. Other people will do that by, I got to go back to work in 2 days. There's nothing wrong with that, unless they're just moving towards ill health by avoiding some of the thoughts and feelings around it, and getting high blood pressure and whatever over time by just pushing it through. But you can really help people with their grief, but people don't need explanation. They need consolation. They kind of need love with skin on it. They need to know that someone can sit or stand by. Sometimes silence is the best gift we give people, just to be present. And again, if you feel we need to say something, to say, I can't imagine what this is for you. I miss him too. Or what a tragedy. I can't even imagine. Now, after Trevor died, about 3 weeks later, one of the nursing directors in the hospital where I lived, her 17-year-old son, 18-year-old son, and 2 other teenage boys coming back from a football game, and they weren't the ones drinking, but they were hit head on in their truck by a drunk driver going 90 miles an hour, and they were all killed instantly. And she and her son had fought that morning, had words before he left for school. And so I took her to lunch and we talked about all of that. There's no way to compare one loss to the other at all. And yet my heart just really went out for her that was the last thing, so we spent some time remembering other times, and we went out to lunch a number of times after that. But sometimes silent presence is the best. We don't have to crowd it with verbal crowding. And some of the things that aren't helpful to say when we think we're being helpful, If I had a nickel for every time somebody said to me, well, Sandy, at least you have 2 other children. As if you had 100 children, that would somehow be a comforting thought, right? Again, well-meaning people.
It's not good execution.
But yeah. And sometimes some people haven't experienced great loss, so they're not as sensitized to it. Anytime we use the language of at least, we've just diminished that person's right to feel what they feel, right? Or judged it in some way. Or the words should or shouldn't. You really should think about doing that. Well, there's really no right or wrong about all of this. There are some healthier ways over time to move through it, but the things that we mean well, and usually people give us a lot of grace, but at least and should are some of those things. I'm looking at my notes. Or to minimize it by saying things like, you're strong, you'll get over it, and everyone suffers. Well, thanks, because at the moment I feel really crummy and I'm really sad. And while some of that may be true, that's not helpful at the time. When the wound is raw, what's really helpful is silence, no judging, not fixing, allowing it to be the tragedy that it is, and just coming alongside people. But because we're kind of uncomfortable with pain and with things we can't control, we think we have to come up with these kinds of things that somehow we think is going to make the person feel better, and they don't.
Right.
They really diminish it. So, or offering cliches. It's not a teachable moment time. People don't need information at this time.
Yeah.
Right?
So I have a question in regards to this with regards to, people that are from a faith community. Some of the things I've heard whenever I was going through hard times is like, just pray about it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Or some of my friends, they'll talk about like, that's the only comfort they got growing up was just pray about it.
Just pray about it. Not real comforting. Neither is a scripture, whatever your faith tradition is at the moment. Those things later can be helpful, maybe, but what's needed, again, is love with skin on it, without judgment. The other person is usually uncomfortable, and that's why they're offering what they're offering. I'll share this with you. I'll never forget when I was a chaplain at a hospital up in Bakersfield, California. There was a Catholic priest who used to come in, Father Patrick. He's long since passed. And although he wasn't my faith tradition, he would come in, and he was one of the few Catholic priests I'd seen who came in and went to the bedside and scooped little ladies' heads and shoulders up and give them kisses on their forehead. And he and I would stand around the bed and we'd sing old hymns. He really ministered to people, and it was lovely. And we used to have theological discussions in my office. And one day we were talking about prayer. And he said to me something I never forgot, and it strengthened how I've done my life. And that is, he said, Sandy, when you go into, he was talking about a patient's room, so it could be with anyone, but when you go into the room, you are the prayer. Oh.
Okay.
That's a whole different way, and a beautiful way, isn't it, to think about it? So praying isn't something so much that others need to do for us, or I am going to do for you, or something I bring you, or something outside of ourselves. We embody love and compassion. For some people, we may be the only compassion that they ever see, or they ever read about, or they've ever seen before. And so that really changed and shaped how I did my work as a chaplain, as a critical care nurse, as working with people at the end of life, is that when you walk into a space, you are the prayer. So I say that as an invitation to all of us, but to just simply say to someone, I'll pray for you, is something that we kind of flippantly say. How about if we asked people, would a prayer be helpful? And I'll do that with you right now. Now, giving choice to people about prayer is really important. So if I lean in toward you and I say, let's pray, there's not a lot of choice there. Right. Or if I say, can I pray for you? Now I'm asking you to give me permission to do something I want to do.
Yeah.
But if I say, Zyra, would a prayer be helpful? Now I've given you full choice, right? I can probably count on, I don't know, both of my hands, 10 fingers or so through my entire career where someone has said no. And be very respectful of that completely, right? And never, ever impose your own spiritual faith tradition or what have you on someone else. That's actually unethical to do. If someone asks, that's fine, but we're not meant to walk through the world banging other people over the head with, our beliefs and things. And so it's just not the way of love and compassion. So I don't know if that helps, but
No, I think through my faith and journey, there's moments where I struggled a lot, but all I got was just pray about it.
yeah.
And that made me feel more lonely than before even asking or bringing it up.
Yeah.
So from conversations with my friends and I, where we've talked about our experiences with that, I just wanted to hear what your perspective was on it.
Yeah, bottom line, I believe, and I just turned 70 this year, so I've lived long enough to at least,
Well,
have
you
a...
look amazing, by the way.
I've lived long enough to have a thought about a thing or two. Doesn't mean I walk on water or have it all figured out, because I don't. But I think we're meant to embody all of that. And sometimes we say that to other people, not maybe consciously trying to cop out, but we're kind of giving ourselves a pass.
Yeah.
Because if I say, I'll pray for you, I mean, how many people really go home and remember anyway to do that?
Right.
Intentionally.
Right.
Right. And it's so we say it and we think maybe it sounds comforting, or Zyra, just go home and pray about it, and everything will just work out. Well, no, because we're meant to come around each other and support each other and help each other wrestle with it even and think it through. I'm a praying person. I believe in the power of prayer. But if that's all I ever did was tell people to go home and pray about it, and I didn't roll my own sleeves up and be the presence of Christ or whatever your spiritual faith tradition is, we've missed it. Right? So some of the self-care things when we're when we're grieving and we're hurting, of course, none of this is rocket science or new, but do things that nourish you and nurture you and that strengthen you. So whether that's time outside in nature, which is so every living thing is meant to be in relationship with us, I believe, every created thing, and can strengthen us. Go hug a tree kind of thing, like it really does matter. And and music that's soothing, of course. Talking with someone that you trust, journaling, relaxing bath, massage. But I mean, we carry any pain. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. So for people who have been into trauma-informed kind of care and so forth, we carry all of this, every cell of our body. In fact, it's interesting for me. Trevor died on June 21 of 1993. So when April comes around each year, I will often I don't get headaches very often, but my body will ache a little more, and I will sometimes have some mild headaches way before my conscious mind remembers, oh, we're moving into this time of year again. Yeah, very interesting. So do things to take care of yourself. Physically, of course, get lots of sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep, drink a lot of water. Grieving is dehydrating. Caffeine and alcohol are dehydrating, and alcohol is a depressant. So people kind of go there, sometimes forgetting or not knowing that that's true. And so just be cautious with that, and gentle exercise, and just let your memories be a source of comfort. I'll put a pitch in here, not because he knows or has asked me, but David Kessler has authored about 6 books on grief. He worked together with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a pioneer in death and dying and in the hospice movement, and is the one who brought the 5 stages of dying to the forefront. She never intended them to become what became the 5 stages of grief. So people took the 5 stages of dying, which has sort of an endpoint in someone's death, and became the 5 stages of grief, and people try to make that linear, but they're not. They're circular. So those 5 were shock and disbelief, And then there is anger that sets in. And of course, anger is not a primary emotion. Always under anger is hurt or fear. So if you kind of chunk through some of the anger, you'll get to discouragement and hurt and so forth. And then we kind of get into this. One of the stages was bargaining. And you can imagine for people, again, in the stages of dying,
Right.
who are bargaining with God and whoever, if you'll do this, then I'll do that, and so forth. But we do feel that way when we're grieving. And then the last stage has always been called acceptance, which is really just moving into the reality of what has happened. But David Kessler has taken that, and his newest book is called Meaning, the Sixth Stage of Grief. And it's really powerful in there. Meaning that over time, we actually incorporate this into our life in a way that brings us a sense of comfort and hope and something we can bless others with. And it has a lot to do, again, with the story that we tell ourselves about it and the support, that we seek and accept. But I mention him because he's easy to Google. He has a online virtual, like a grief support group called Tender Hearts that runs regularly that people can be a part of. And there's a lot of grief support in most counties and in most cities and stuff. You can go online and find places. Some people don't find their greatest comfort with others. Mm-hmm. I know that after Trevor died, I was invited to go to the group Compassionate Friends, which has been around a long time and is an amazing organization that supports parents who've lost children. And I went 3 or 4 times, and I enjoyed that. For me, I already had tremendous support through others and through family and so forth, and actually found my greater support there. So all these different ways of finding some support each one's not for everyone. We have to find kind of what resonates with us. Another guy that I took one of his courses is Paul Denniston, a friend of David Kessler's, and he does grief yoga and grief movement. And I found it really powerful then to take the experience of grief and put movement to it, where we're holding our hands over our own heart, or where we're punching the air, or whatever it is we're going through, but you put some movement to it, and it helps take the emotion and move it through us. Yeah. So I found that really, really helpful. And then it's important people know when to seek professional support. And that I've got just a few things listed here. If you're isolating yourself, or if you notice someone isolating themselves, if the support of wise friends and family is not enough, if you notice someone else continually seeking comfort in alcohol, drugs, or other potentially harmful and addictive ways that will really just put off and cover the need to grieve and can bring all kinds of other, ailments and physical problems. Again, people have choices in how they move through it. If they experience repeated losses in their life, so that's called complicated grief. So for example, losing Trevor as I did, and then less than a year later to go through a divorce. And 2 years before Trevor, my daughter, who was born so early, even though she did well and came through that, she was 90 days in a neonatal intensive care unit, scary time. So when things are layered on, it can be heavier for people. And it's really helpful for them to have more support. If anyone fears harming themselves or others, or are talking about that, or just simply don't feel good about themselves and just constantly sort to feel kind of stressed out, we can encourage people to seek professional help. That's what it's there for. Just like if we broke our leg, it would have to be in a cast and we'd have some physical therapy. There's emotional therapy that can be really helpful for some people. Mm-hmm. And it's not a sign of weakness at all to utilize that. These are specially trained people who can really help us chart our story and reframe our life, if you will. People will say, well, we can't go. You hear that after the pandemic. If everything would just get back to normal. But of course, nothing is ever normal. Yeah. This year, even if I haven't been through trauma, it's not like last year wasn't normal and this is different. Like we're constantly reframing normal because life is always changing, right?
Right.
And so, we hopefully learn as we go how to do that. And I'll never forget, you've seen this in photos and pictures, if not on a walk, how you just see like the little grass or the dandelion coming up through the cement. Like that just fascinates me. Like through a crack in the cement,
Right.
not a crack that was made by the guys who laid the cement, but I mean something that was made by the dandelion coming up through the cement, or the tree that's growing out of the rock in Yosemite, or whatever it is. This idea that there really can't be true strength or growth without challenge and without struggle. For some reason, we're kind of made that way. And hopefully the beauty is that we don't go through it alone, and that we can, be there for other people and allow them to be there for us.
Well, I'm like speechless because of just so many really important points that I think all of us could use a friendly reminder every once in a while.
I can use it myself.
Right? Just, again, just you sharing your story and all the things that you've been through and learned. And just, again, like I said at the beginning of the episode, the way you carry yourself is just, you're very bright and very warm. And I definitely admire that very much.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you. And your face has that. You carry that. It doesn't only come with lots of age.
Thank you.
So I could come over and have you help me through some things. That would be just fine.
I started the podcast kind of out of grief, where there was things in my life that I hadn't worked through as quickly as I would have liked if I had been aware. And so going through therapy for the first time and realizing, it's not weakness. It's not bad to go get help.
No.
That was
wonderful.
That was a huge turning point for me. And I just realized there's a lot of conversations I wish I had. So let me create a platform where I can have these conversations to share. So as you're talking about grief and just everything in my head, it's just kind of like a full circle moment with this podcast, because it's the reason why I do the podcast, is that way it can bring awareness. And going to therapy is not weakness. Crying is not weakness.
Exactly.
Being vulnerable isn't that either.
No, it's really part of our strength. Well, kudos to you for sensing that, and the call coming on you, and you answered it, and you're no doubt making a big difference for a lot of people. So
thank you.
Yeah, you bet. My privilege. Thanks for having me, and I'm honored to have been a part.
No, this is the last episode of the year.
Wow.
So I am very happy and honored that I was able to do it with you. So again, thank you so much.
My privilege.
Well, guys, that's it. This is the last episode of the year. So we're approaching the holidays. I hope everyone has a good holiday, whatever you celebrate, with friends, family. And for those of you that this might be a difficult time, I hope you're able to seek out a good support system, whether it's your therapist, friends, family, me. You can always reach out. So again, thank you for tuning in this whole year. I've appreciated all of you. Definitely going to be coming back for next year. Going to take a few weeks break because it's the holidays. So I want to relax with my family and all that. But I'll be back in a few weeks, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Happy holidays, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.